I spent 31 years as a family court judge. I have seen things in that courtroom that would make most people lose sleep for a decade. Mothers weeping over custody papers, fathers who could not look their own children in the eye, children who had learned to make themselves invisible before they learned to read. I thought that work had prepared me for anything. I was wrong. Nothing prepares you for the moment you realize the danger is not in your courtroom. It is sitting across from you at your own dinner table, cutting into the pot roast you made from scratch, smiling at you with teeth that are just a little too perfect. My name is not important. What matters is that I am a mother, and when my daughter needed me, I knew exactly what to do. My daughter, I will call her Claire, was the kind of child who filled every room she walked into, not loudly. She was never loud. She filled rooms the way morning light fills them, gradually, completely, without asking permission. She had her father's eyes and my stubbornness. And from the time she was 7 years old, she could argue a position so cleanly that I used to joke she would end up on the bench beside me. She became a pediatric nurse instead, which, if you asked me, required even more grace than the law. Claire met her husband, I will call him Marcus, at a fundraiser for the children's hospital where she worked. He was in finance. He wore a well-fitted suit and he laughed at the right moments, and he looked at my daughter the way men look at things they intend to keep. I noticed that even then, I filed it away the way I used to file things in court, no conclusion yet, just observation. He was charming. I want to be honest about that because it matters to the story. He was genuinely charming. He remembered my birthday the first year they dated. He brought good wine. He asked questions about my cases, about the law, and he listened, or he seemed to listen, with what looked like real interest. My husband, God rest him, passed 4 years before Claire met Marcus, and there were moments in those early years where I caught myself thinking, he is good for her. She seems happy. I told myself that was enough. They were engaged after 18 months. Married at a vineyard in Virginia on a Saturday in October when the leaves were exactly the color they should be. Claire wore a dress with buttons down the back. 32 of them, she told me, and she cried when she walked toward him, but they were the right kind of tears. The kind that come from feeling certain. The first year of marriage looked fine from the outside. It looked fine from the inside, too, for a while, or so Claire told me later. Much later, the first thing I noticed, and I want to be precise about when I noticed it, because precision matters, was at Thanksgiving, 14 months after the wedding. We were in my kitchen, Claire and I asked her about a colleague of hers I had met at the hospital gala the previous spring. A woman named Patrice, who was funny and warm and who had clearly been a close friend of Claire's for years. Claire paused just a half-second too long before answering. "We don't really talk anymore," she said, and then immediately changed the subject to the sweet potatoes. I did not push. I noted it. 3 weeks later, I called her on a Tuesday evening, the way I had done every Tuesday evening, for her entire adult life. She picked up, but she spoke a little faster than usual, and twice she laughed at something that was not funny, and once she said, "I agree," in response to something I had not framed as a question. When we hung up, I sat in my chair by the window for a long time. I had heard that voice before, not from Claire, from women in my courtroom, women who had learned to perform normalcy so consistently that they had almost forgotten what normal actually felt like. I want to be clear, I had no proof. I had a Thanksgiving pause and a phone call. A judge does not act on instinct alone. I decided to watch more carefully. What I saw over the next several months was a slow and very deliberate erasure. Patrice was gone, as I said. Then a friend from nursing school stopped appearing in Claire's stories. Then her cousin, with whom she had been close since childhood, seemed to have drifted away. Claire mentioned almost in passing that they had grown apart. I had watched those 2 girls grow up together. They had not grown apart. Something had pushed them. Claire started dressing differently, not badly. Marcus had taste and he exercised it on her, But the colors were muted now, creams and grays and soft navies, where she had always worn jewel tones. Burgundy, forest green, colors that matched her personality. I mentioned it once, gently, and she said she had just been drawn to a quieter palette lately. She said it the way people say things that have been said to them so many times they have adopted them as their own. Her opinions began to arrive pre-softened. Claire had always been direct. It was one of the things I loved most about her. She would tell you what she thought, and she would tell you why, and she would listen carefully if you disagreed. But somewhere in the second year of that marriage, her sentences started ending in question marks that should have been periods. I think the policy is unfair, but I might be misreading it. I felt hurt by what she said, but maybe I overreacted. She had never second-guessed herself like that. Not once in 34 years. I began to understand that someone was doing it for her. I did not confront Claire. I want to explain why, because some people find that choice difficult to understand. I had spent 3 decades watching well-meaning interventions backfire. A woman who is being controlled does not respond to pressure from the outside the way we want her to. It confirms what she has been told, that the people who love her are trying to manage her just like he said they would. The intervention becomes evidence for the prosecution. So instead, I got closer. I called more. I visited more. I made myself a constant, quiet, undramatic presence in her life. I was not there to rescue her. I was there so that when she was ready, if she became ready, she would know without any doubt that I was a safe place to land. And I watched Marcus. The thing about men like Marcus is that they are not monsters in every room. That is what makes them so dangerous and so difficult to name. At my table he was polite, occasionally funny, solicitous in small ways. He refilled glasses. He complimented the cooking. He called me by a respectful name, and he never raised his voice in my presence. But there were tells. He interrupted Claire constantly, not rudely, almost gently, the way you might redirect a child who was about to say something embarrassing. He finished her sentences when she was perfectly capable of finishing them herself. When she offered an opinion, he would say, "What she means is," and then say something subtly different from what she had said. He was translating her, replacing her one sentence at a time. Once at Easter, this was the 3rd year, she made a comment about a news story, something confident and well-reasoned, and he looked at her across the table with a small smile that had no warmth in it whatsoever, and said, "That's a little simplistic, don't you think?" And Claire, my daughter who had argued circles around law professors, my daughter who once made a hospital administrator back down from a policy that was going to harm children, said, "You're probably right," and looked down at her plate. Something shifted in me that evening. I kept my face still. I have had a lot of practice keeping my face still. But underneath it, something moved from concern into something quieter and more resolved. The incident that changed everything happened on a Friday evening in March. I had invited them for dinner. I had made the lamb stew that Claire had loved since she was a teenager, and I had set the table properly. Cloth napkins, the good glasses, because I have always believed that the effort of a well-set table communicates something that words cannot. That you matter, that this time together is worth the trouble. Marcus arrived in a mood. I could read it the moment he came through the door. Nothing you could point to exactly. He was polite, he was composed. But something was running under the surface of him, tight and coiled. Claire came in just behind him, and she was already smaller than she should have been, already arranged. We sat down. I served. The conversation was careful in the way conversations become careful when someone at the table is holding something back. I had made fresh bread. Claire reached for a second piece, and Marcus, without looking up from his bowl, said, "You sure about that?" 2 words. Said quietly. Said the way you might say them to someone who had been told, many times before, not to make certain choices without permission. Claire's hand stopped. She set the bread back down. She did not look at me. I looked at him. He was still looking at his bowl. I said in the voice I used for courtrooms, "Marcus." He looked up. She is a grown woman in her mother's house, I said. She may have bread. The silence that followed had several layers. He assessed me. I let him. I had been assessed by better men than Marcus across longer tables than this one, and I had never once looked away first. He smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of someone recalculating. Of course, he said. Claire did not take the bread. That night, after he went to get the car, she helped me carry dishes to the kitchen, and I touched her hand at the sink, and I said, very quietly, I see you. She did not respond, but her eyes filled up and she blinked it back fast, the way someone blinks back tears when they have learned that crying has consequences. That was enough for me. I did not sleep much that night. I sat in my study with the lamp on, and I made a list, not on paper, in my head, the way I have always organized things that matter, of what I knew, what I suspected, and what I needed to find out. I have been building cases my entire professional life. I knew how to do this. Over the next 2 months, I made calls, careful calls. I reached out to Patrice, who had not heard from Claire in over a year and who told me, with a heaviness in her voice that said she had been carrying this for a long time, that the last time she had tried to make plans with Claire, Marcus had answered Claire's phone and told Patrice that Claire was busy and would call her back. She never did. I reached out to Claire's cousin, who told me a similar story, and who cried a little on the phone and who asked me, "Is she okay? I've been so worried." I reached out to a colleague of Claire's at the hospital, carefully, professionally, who told me that Claire had requested to move to a different shift, that she seemed tired all the time, that she did not join them for lunch anymore. I reached out to a former colleague of mine, a man I had worked with for years, a retired detective, someone I trusted entirely. I told him what I had observed. I told him what I had gathered. I asked him to help me understand if there was more. There was more. I am going to be careful here about what I say, because some of it is still something I hold close. But what I learned in those weeks confirmed what I already knew. The control was deep, and it was systematic, and it had been going on far longer than I had realized. There had been an incident, not the bread, not the small daily diminishments, but an actual incident that Claire had told no one about. Not me, not anyone. She had been too ashamed or too convinced that no one would believe her or too certain that she had somehow brought it on herself. That knowledge sat in my chest like a stone. But I had been a judge long enough to know that my anger, however justified, was not the tool for this moment. Anger is loud. Loud things warn people. What I needed was to be very, very quiet. I called Claire and asked if she wanted to come for lunch. Just the two of us the following Saturday. She arrived looking like someone who had been awake for several nights in a row. She sat at my kitchen table and she held her mug with both hands and she talked about work, about a little boy who had been discharged that week, and she smiled when she talked about him. I watched her smile and I thought, there she is. That is still my daughter in there. Whatever he has built around her, she is still in there. We talked for a while about ordinary things, and then I put my hand on hers and I said, Claire, I need you to know something. She looked at me. Whatever has happened, and whatever you decide to do about it, I said, I am not going anywhere. I am not going to tell you what to do. I am not going to be angry at you for any decision you have made or any decision you have made or any decision you make from here forward. I am your mother, and that is not a conditional arrangement. She looked at me for a long moment. Then her face did something I had not seen it do in years. It stopped performing, all of it, the careful smile, the measured composure. It just fell away, and underneath it was my daughter, exhausted and frightened and so relieved to be seen that she could not hold herself together for another second. She talked for 2 hours. I listened to all of it. I did not interrupt. I did not offer solutions. I did not say, I knew it, or I told you so, or any of the things that would have been about me instead of her. I just let her talk until she had said everything she had been holding, And when she was done, I handed her a box of tissues and I said, "Okay, here is what I know how to do." I had already made calls. I had already built the foundation. I had the name of an attorney, a very good one, someone who had appeared in my courtroom, who I knew to be rigorous and unintimidated. I had documentation from my retired detective colleague. I had a safe place for Claire to stay, arranged quietly, without Marcus knowing anything about it. I want to pause here and say something for anyone who might be hearing this and recognizing their own life in it. The moment a woman in a controlled situation begins to move toward an exit, that is often the most dangerous time. I knew this from my career. Every resource I put in place was put in place with that in mind. We did not act quickly. We acted carefully. We made sure that when Claire moved, she moved completely, and that Marcus had no advance notice and no leverage. It took 6 weeks to put everything in position. Marcus came home one Tuesday evening to an empty house. Claire's things were not there. Claire was not there. What was there was a letter from her attorney, formal and unambiguous, and a set of documents that he had not expected and would not enjoy. I was with Claire when she made the call to confirm she was safe, and I watched her face in the moment she understood it was really happening, that she was outside of it, that she was standing in a different room than the one she had been living in, and the door was closed behind her and she had the key. She went back to the jewel tones. That is the detail I want to tell you, because it might seem small and it is not small at all. She wore a green blouse to our first real lunch together as free women, a deep, unapologetic forest green, and she laughed at something I said the way she used to laugh, fully, without checking herself, and I thought, there it is. There is the room filling up again. She is not all the way back. I want to be honest about that too. Recovery from something like this is not a straight line, and it is not fast. There are days when she calls me and I can hear that she is still sorting through what was real and what was constructed for her over 4 years of careful erosion. She has a good therapist, she has her cousin back, and Patrice, and a circle of people who are showing up for her in the ways that matter. She runs in the mornings now. She told me that. She goes out before the city is fully awake, and she runs. And she said one morning she realized halfway through the run that she had not thought about what Marcus would think of something in over a week. She said she stopped on the sidewalk for a moment just to feel it. She said it felt like breathing. The legal process is ongoing, and I will leave the details of that where they belong, which is in the hands of professionals who are very good at their jobs. What I will tell you is that silence was not an option, and that the worst thing I could have done, for myself, and more importantly for my daughter, was to wait for undeniable proof before I started paying attention. The signs were there early. The small changes. The pauses. The disappeared friends. The opinions that started shrinking. I had spent 3 decades learning to read those signs in strangers, and when they appeared in my own child, I almost talked myself out of seeing them, because it is a different thing entirely when it is your own. It should not be a different thing. That is what I want to leave you with. If you are a mother, or a father, or a sister, or a brother, or a friend, and something feels different in someone you love, not dramatically different, not movie of the week different, but quietly, gradually, almost imperceptibly different, do not talk yourself out of it. You do not need certainty to start paying closer attention. You do not need proof to make yourself available. You do not need to wait for a crisis to say, quietly, I see you, I am not going anywhere. Sometimes that is the whole thing. Sometimes knowing that someone sees you is the first step toward being able to see yourself again. My daughter is standing in the morning before the city wakes up, and she is running, and she is breathing, and she is wearing the right colors. That is what paying attention looks like when it works. What about you? Is there someone in your life who seems a little smaller than they used to be? I would love to hear from you in the comments. And wherever you are watching from tonight, I hope someone in your life sees you too.